And Eraring was one of the issues that I discussed with Finance Minister and Government Leader in the Senate, Simon Birmingham, earlier. I started out by talking to him about the China issue, however. Now, are you prepared to repeat outside the House what the PM said yesterday, that Richard Marles is a Manchurian candidate?
Look, I'm not going to go around in terms of specific phrases. I think what is important for Australians in the run-up to an election is to understand the choice and the contrast. And there is going to be a clear choice at this next election between the Liberal and National parties, who have been strong and solid in all aspects of national security, not least of which the growth 6% year on year we've applied to defence spending after the Labor Party drove defence spending down to its lowest levels since 1938. So we've got a strong contrast there. There are contrasts as well in terms of what Mr Albanese has said in response to economic coercion from China.
Let me just stop you there. What was the PM getting at with calling Richard Marles a Manchurian candidate?
Well, I think Mr Marles has got speech and remarks on the record that he doesn't like having on the record. They're not even on his website in terms of the speech that he gave on his last trip to China. That's for Mr Marles to defend as to why he wants to airbrush that speech away from the public record and took it off his website and isn't publishing it. But national security is a key factor in terms of who Australians will decide governs and protects this nation in the years ahead.
I'll have to ask you about Mike Burgess's comments, the ASIO Director General. He says there's foreign interference on both sides, and he says it is not helpful for the government to be using this issue politically. I mean, how do you respond to that?
Well, I think Mr Burgess was talking in the general in terms of where he said politicisation is not helpful. And the government doesn't seek to politicise, but we absolutely will seek to draw the contrast of where the Labor Party has a different track record to us in areas such as defence spending, where we've shown leadership in areas such as legislating for foreign interference, or where Mr Albanese has gone out and used language that suggests that he would be less firm in relation to response to economic coercion than we are being and demonstrating.
Well, Dennis Richardson says this only helps China.
Oh, this is about the democratic process in Australia. An election is always a choice, and that choice is framed on the issues of substance. National security has been a topic of contrast at many elections in the past, over many decades, between the parties. Our track record of record levels of investment in defence, of growing that to more than 2% of Australia's GDP, when the Labor Party took it to levels not seen since 1938, is a sharp contrast.
Okay,
and it's a contrast on the track record of the parties, and that is fair game absolutely for an election.
Do you believe Labor would appease the Chinese Communist Party?
Andrew, it worries me when I see Mr Albanese make comments like he did at the press club, suggesting that some industries may get left as the subject of coercion and that he wouldn't stand up for some, the same as he might stand up for others. We should stand up for all Australian jobs and all Australian industries. That's the approach of our government.
But this is a bit Reds under the bed, isn't it? This is sort of a bit scare camp. They support AUKUS, for example.
Well, they say they've indicated support for AUKUS and that is welcome. But AUKUS is possible because of what our government has done in defence spending. AUKUS would not have been possible if you had the same trajectory of defence spending that was the case when the Labor Party was in office.
All right, well, let's move on. The job numbers, pretty good news, 4.2%. How low can it go, and why are you so far behind in the polls when unemployment's so low? Because traditionally that's not the case, usually.
Well, again, I'll let poll commentary be one for the commentators, but the unemployment outcomes are very encouraging. To have 4.2% for the second month in a row, the lowest figures in 13 years, and that's an incredibly strong outcome at the time when Omicron was hitting and causing significant disruption across the Australian economy. Now, it's a little surprised that the number of hours worked was down due to the number of people in isolation, but in terms of the strength and resilience of the economy and the ability to rebound quickly from that disruption, it's demonstrated by the fact that we had unemployment at such a low rate, youth unemployment down to its lowest rate since 2008. That's a very strong achievement when you think that historically in recessions, youth unemployment has had a long tail and had enormous costs on the lives of young people. In this recession, we've not only avoided a spike in youth unemployment, we've actually, from our economic policies, driven youth unemployment to even further lows than it was beforehand.
On labour shortages, would you like to see a system where COVID isolation rules aren't so harsh in terms of household contacts, 7 days? Do you think we'll move to that sort of system this year?
Well, I think we've shown a responsiveness to that already in terms of the easing of those isolation rules. If you think about the Doherty Institute modelling that was undertaken late last year, obviously the number of cases predicted by the Doherty Institute proved to be far higher than the worst case scenarios because of Omicron. But the health impacts, the hospitalisation rates and the deaths didn't prove to be as bad because Omicron is far less severe. That's enabled us, along with the evidence about how quickly transmission occurs from Omicron, to already shorten, in some cases halve, those isolation requirements. And we'll continue to work with the health officials in the states and territories to do that so that we can manage COVID in the future as normally as possible with as minimal disruption on the economy as possible.
And Eraring's decision, Origin Energy's decision, should I say, on the Eraring power plant, I mean, that's 20% of the power production in New South Wales. What's your reaction to that and the New South Wales government's response to it with the battery, I guess?
Well, it underscores the importance of the decisions our government had already taken, particularly in areas such as the Kurri Kurri gas plant that we had already committed to invest in, that the Labor Party had to be dragged kicking and screaming to supporting. But that investment is now shown to be very prescient in terms of meeting some of the potential capability or supply shortages that could exist. Obviously, there'll be much closer analysis around this decision, and I'll leave it to the Energy Minister to provide further info.
When will we hear about the future of Alan Tudge? Will that be within days or more likely weeks?
Officials from the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet went through the process that the Vivian Thom inquiry and review is at. Whilst the work on that has been completed, there's a process of consultation with third parties to confirm which parts of Dr Thom's report can be provided to both Ms Miller and Mr Tudge. And once that's concluded, then I would expect all other matters to be concluded fairly swiftly.
So within days?
That really depends on what those third parties have had to say and how quickly the work from that can be completed.
Is he gone?
Look, there's a process underway and I respect the process.
But his name's even off the door.
He stood down.
Do you know what was the reason for that, to take it off the door so quickly?
I can't speak for the decisions of those who to put the nameplates on the doors. Mr Tudge stood down late last year on the day that these allegations were raised. The Prime Minister took swift action in putting in place the independent inquiry. We're now concluding those processes, but we're trying to make sure this process is a fair one to everybody involved.